Welcome to this month's Step into the Story Live book chat. I'm Donna Jones Elworth. I'm with my co-host Barbara Tanner Wallace. And if you're new to the show, we're both authors and lovers of historical fiction.
Hello. I'm laughing because no sooner do we come on than my Alexa asked me if I wanted to go for a walk.
Oh, that's funny.
Like, no, Alexa, I don't. Thank you, though.
Yeah, not right now. Not right now. A bit busy. How are things? What are you up to?
They're going well. I got my Chinese cat here.
I see that.
Yeah, my niece bought it for me when from Chinatown. So we're celebrating the Chinese culture in our family. Not much. Very quiet. Going to see my grandbaby this weekend, and it's my son's 30th birthday, but really it's going to see my grandbaby.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of the baby shower here this weekend, so we're all about the babies.
It's babies.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a pretty great discussion because we were talking about our book of the month earlier, and so this month we read The Phoenix Crown by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang, and I mean clearly this was already going to be a big seller because Kate Quinn is crazy popular and for a really good reason. Oh my God, I love your cat.
He's decided to join too. We're going to see Kate Quinn in London. So yeah, that's how big she is. We're going to fly to go see Kate Quinn in London.
Right? She's going to be at a conference. But I'm also a big fan of Janie's, and I find Janie's voice is really lovely, and the way she writes, she uses language beautifully. So let's talk for a minute about co-writing and blending two strong and different voices into one.
Yeah, I thought they did a really good job with that. A lot of times when I read a co-written novel, I always feel like there's something missing. And it's not that the books are badly written, because we've read some really good co-written novels. But I frequently walk away feeling like the authors didn't plumb the characters as deeply as they could have. Either because they were forced into like a novella thing, which, by the way, it does happen in novellas too, because so much action has to happen off stage. You have to lose part of the story in order to fit the space. And I also think when you're co-writing, you have an outline. You agree upon a plot, and you don't have the luxury of letting your character take you in a new direction, because if you do, you screw up your writing partner. So you're forced to kind of stay in these constraints. And I thought that this book was different because it was complex. Things that happened on page 1 did come into play later in the book. And what it seems like what they did was they plotted their book based on character rather than a plot. Like they came up with what a theme was going to be, and then they plotted out how their characters were going to react to the action rather than the action carrying the characters.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I'm thinking of a couple of times when two different characters made decisions on how to act that were based on things that they like, from motivations that were, sort of planted much earlier in the story. And so it wasn't just what was in the moment. It was really true to character. I think.
Yeah, and no one acted out of character, which was sometimes happens when you have a plot-driven book because they have no choice. But everything really felt in character. Like when a woman makes a bad decision, it was still in character.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because if you read the author's note, they talk about using spreadsheets a lot. So I feel like when you were saying that it was so complex and you can't just sort of wing it because you'll screw up your writing partner, it'd be like, well, now I have to revise the spreadsheet kind of thing. So I think if I were to co-write, I would be the kind that would be much more, you take this character's point of view and I'll take this one. And, we'll each write like that part of the story. Mm-hmm. Because blending two distinct voices seems like a really gargantuan task. But I really feel like that's what they did here. Like they each brought their specific strengths to the table, but the end result was pretty seamless. Like not once did I get pulled out thinking like, oh, Janie wrote this, or this has Kate all over it, as far as like consistent style throughout.
Style-wise, I agree with you. I was going to say, I could tell the difference, but I wanted to tell the difference. I mean, I knew which section Janie wrote and I knew which section Kate wrote. But I wanted those two voices to be different. So that didn't bother me. But I get what you mean about it being seamless, because if anyone's read, I've read a lot of Kate Quinn, you've read a lot of Quinn. She's got a much grittier voice, or can have a much grittier voice.
Yeah.
And there was none of that. Her characters were much softer edged than they normally are.
Yeah, and that's where like I would look at those characters and I could see Janie's influence in it. And then there were other points where, like, there's a scene near the end that was at the party at Versailles.
Oh, yeah.
And at one moment, three of the women sort of step out of the shadows. And that image of, you know, that strength and unity, that just struck me as having Kate's fingerprints all over it.
Oh, it did. You know what it reminded me of is that scene in the lake at the Huntress.
Yeah.
Where she comes up as a creature from the lake, and
yeah, and so I just felt like that was sort of a trademark Kate Quinn kind of image and action. But as far as the actual voice, like, I felt like the voice throughout was very consistent.
Yes, and I agree.
Yeah, and it was, I do find it was a blend of Kate's approach and then Janie's beautiful language, and then they just, I'm in awe of how they did that, because like I said, I'd be the kind to say, okay, you write so and so and I'll write so and so, and then we'll try to blend it together. Like, I don't know, I think I would find it, I don't think co-writing is easy.
No, and I because the books I've read that are co-written, we've read a couple that were like, we've done it and said, well, there was something missing, and I know if she were writing this by herself, it would be different. And I have to admit, I have not read The Porcelain Moon, which is Janie's book that you raved about, and I have it. I just have not read it. But
it's so good.
I give Kate a lot of points, not having read Janie, so she might get points too. I don't know. But I give Kate a lot of points because I think it's very hard to change your voice that comes naturally. I mean, she had to work very hard to be different.
Yeah.
And you know, ego at the door. And I think that it's clear that both of them did.
It's before I forget too, there's also an Easter egg for people who have read Porcelain Moon. Toward the end of the book, when everyone's in Paris, there's a little Easter egg for Porcelain Moon fans. So I really enjoyed seeing that sort of pop up. And so that was kind of cool, because Porcelain Moon is set during World War I, so not long after. I mean, it's still sort of in the same basic time period.
No, and I actually do want to read it, because the funny thing is the book Yellowface, which was like the book of 2023, the manuscript that they're all arguing over is really the plot of Janie Chang's book. You know, it's about migrant Chinese working in World War I, and like they're all fighting about it. I'm like, oh, well, Janie wrote it. I don't know why you're, you know.
Yeah, just go read it. Yeah, and I think one of the things that Janie brought to this is, like, she writes, it's not just beautiful, but it's atmospheric.
Yep.
So I think she really brought that style in with her, and then they just worked and brought it together.
Speaking of which, I'm going to go off script for just a second.
Yeah.
I got a real sense of place with this book that you don't always get. I think they really brought San Francisco, especially. They brought it to life. So you really got a sense of it as a living, breathing city before the earthquake.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially Chinatown. She did a great job.
I agree. And then again, in the note, you realize that, you know, the Chinatown that became, like, that came after the earthquake is a very different looking Chinatown than what came before it.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's all. There's so many interesting things about it. Like, I learned a lot, which I love it when that happens when I read.
Yeah, but I said I think one of my favorite parts was actually the author's note at the end.
Yeah, you told me that last night. Yeah. So what's really interesting too is that we have four main characters, but only two of those main characters are point of view characters. And I know you have some thoughts on that.
I do. I do. Actually, we have 3 point of view characters. Alice pops in.
Does she pop in as a point of view
Pops in
character?
at the beginning, and then she pops in again in the middle.
Oh, okay. So
The only one we don't hear from is Reggie. And you and I have talked about this. Okay, wait. Spoiler alert. We're going to talk about some things. So if you haven't read the book and you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this next portion.
yeah, give us
It's hard
like
to
5
talk about
minutes.
without spoiling it. So,
Yeah.
spoiler. You've all been warned. Okay.
Okay.
You and I talked about it and agreed that there were ups and downs to not getting Reggie's point of view.
Yes.
Right. The upside is her absence sustains the mystery, like you said.
Yeah.
Do you want to? You had some points about that, so I'm going to let you throw it back.
Oh, okay. So
the downside.
So by not having Reggie's point of view, then it allowed. Okay, let me rephrase that. If we'd had Reggie's point of view, then it would have altered a lot of the plot and suspense. So
Yes.
we would have, because we don't really meet Reggie till about halfway through the book.
Well, you're
And
not
we know,
supposed to know who Reggie is.
right. And we figure that out about halfway through. So if we'd had Reggie's point of view, then we would have seen what had happened to her.
Right.
And then if we had seen her point of view even after the earthquake and like everything that happened immediately following, then when we get to the end, Reggie's actions wouldn't have had the same sort of impact, I don't think, because Reggie's kind of the wild card in the bunch, right? She's the most unpredictable. She's the one that, and we're going to talk about her PTSD in a little bit. So I think if we'd been in her head, I think it would have changed a lot and not made some of the suspense.
And I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
But there's a flip side to that too that I agree that you brought up and I agree with.
Which is this is the woman who suffers the most of everybody, and we don't really get to connect with her. And I'm not asking for a ton. I mean, I know that adding a whole third point of view would have been a whole different book. But like, there's a chapter where she covers 3 point of views. They could have slid a 4th in. I mean, every once in a while, I wanted to feel her pain. And I felt like I couldn't connect with her as much. And she's the one that had huge, huge issues. Rightly so, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, she was pretty tortured. Right. So, and I wish I would have liked to have been in her head just a little bit. So the downside of that is, so it did serve the story not to do it. And I'm betting that they went back and forth on whether they should do it or not.
I think so too. And you're right, though. I think not having it served the story more than having it would have. But you're right. She does suffer the most, and we don't get that point of view connection with it. And you were saying that you connect with other characters more.
Yes.
And I would agree with that too. But although I will say there's when we get toward the end and Reggie explains why she's done something, and it was the wrong thing to do, but for such a good reason. And I really felt for her. So, I mean, I felt like I connected with her regardless of whether I was in her point of view or not.
I would have connected more. I felt the other issues that she has. This is trying to talk without spoiling.
I know.
There's a real big thing where she's not doing what she's good at.
She goes through a lot, and so that affects her in many big ways.
Right. So, all right. So when we're talking about her, we can't really talk about her and not talk about the theme of post-traumatic stress disorder and taking back your, I guess it's taking back your agency and not letting fear define you anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really big theme for all 4 women, because they're traumatized first by the earthquake, and and then the ensuing fire and everything else that happened. And they're also traumatized by the villain,
Yeah.
who is I actually one of the best villains in a long time, because he had flashes of real likability.
And his own vulnerability. I mean, he wasn't a cardboard villain.
No, because there were times when you actually, you're listening to Gemma's point of view. He is sympathetic, and you do kind of like, oh, he's kind of likable, and you're waiting to hear why he's a bad person, and then by the end, you kind of find out why he's a horrible person. And he's a really horrible person, but
Yeah.
but I thought he was one of the better drawn villains that I've read in a long, long time, because he really was 3-dimensional, and he even had like reasons why he was doing it.
Yeah.
They gave him a good backstory.
Yeah.
So,
And there's a point where so Gemma, he looks at Gemma and says that he's sorry, and I think he genuinely means it.
yeah.
Doesn't mean he's going to do the right thing, but
And
I
I
think
think Gemma even thinks that, like,
right.
he's sincere. He's not a good person, but in that one moment, she's like, I think he does believe this one.
Yeah, I think he actually regrets having to do this. But so it kind of goes to show that PTSD can have several sources or many sources, and so all of these women are going to have trauma responses to the natural disaster. I mean, that alone would have been plenty. But then, they're also victims of abuse and of crimes at the hands of the villain. So there's a scene where they're locked in the conservatory at Thornton's house, and they're terrified. And so, without giving away too much of what leads to this moment, what struck me was the deliberate choice that Janie and Kate made to write this part of this scene with the women in full-on panic. And like there's one where someone's running around the room screaming, and a
Well,
lot
it's
of
very interesting how they all reacted, and I think it showed a lot about their character, particularly Suling and Gemma. And it showed something that Gemma doesn't think she has. And how they all reacted was very interesting. And the one that surprised me was Alice.
Yeah.
That.
Yep. And so when I saw that, like normally as writers, when we go into a scene like that, we expect to see our main characters, feeling the urge to panic, but resisting it to be strong and be proactive and do the right thing. And so I kind of expected that. And then all of a sudden, here's these women, and they are just losing their minds. And it felt incredibly human. And I loved how that was written. That was just like, there were just these moments throughout the book where, there'd be a deliberate choice that I would be like, wow, I like that. So
yeah, I liked how they did that. And what I like is that they could not overcome. I mean, it would be much harder to overcome the trauma of an earthquake. That an earthquake like that, especially.
Yeah.
But Thornton represented that in a lot of ways, and they were able to get over their trauma of the earthquake by besting him.
Yeah, because they're tied together, right? And none of them ever wanted to go back to San Francisco.
No.
But and so they can't do anything about what happened with the earthquake. What they can do something about is what happens with the villain.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of empowers them to do that. And so I mean, we could talk trauma responses all day long, because all of them handle their their trauma responses differently.
What's interesting is 2 of them especially showed a strength that I don't think they knew they had.
And it's our 2 main characters, our 2 main
Yes.
point of view characters.
Who have the greatest character arcs. They have very good character arcs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I said I think that they plotted this book based on how they wanted their characters to travel.
Yeah, and you know what? They despite maybe signs of their trauma that they have to deal with, because it's not like they're fine, because they're not, but they move on and they thrive.
Right.
But it's Alice and Reggie who really struggle, and both Alice and Reggie have a really difficult time going back to the things that they're passionate about.
Yes.
And so I thought that was really interesting. While Gemma goes on and her career goes on the upswing, Suling, does very well for herself and doing the things that they're passionate about, and they manage to sort of pick themselves up and move on despite it. But Alice and Reggie get stuck.
There's a great line in it where Gemma actually says to Suling, "You just learn to live with the pain."
Yeah, and it's about
referring to a whole lot.
Yeah, and that's about more than just trauma. That's also about her, like, she's really talking about her migraines, but it's
right.
She's not so much more than that. Yeah.
There's a lot of that stuff. She was not talking about migraines, but she was talking about migraines.
Yeah, exactly.
Had a lot of great subtext in this book.
Yeah. So, I mean, I felt like the words just worked hard.
Yeah, they did.
I felt like everything worked hard. Do you want to say anything about Gemma's migraines, since you are a migraine sufferer?
Oh, funny you should say that, since I have one. My migraines are not nearly the same as hers. I suffer from chronic headaches, and I do take migraine medicine for it, but I only get the type that she got for, I only get those maybe twice or 2 or 3 times a year. It's awful though. And the idea that you have to be in the darkened room. I probably wouldn't own a bird. I thought that was a weird choice of a pet. I get it. There was symbolism in it and all that other stuff. I just was thinking, if I had a migraine, the last thing I'd want is a bird that squawked. But I can barely stand my cats when I have a migraine.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a really honest weakness and an honest fear that wouldn't go away, like that one that she did have to learn to deal with.
Well, right, because if your career depends on you being on stage for however long, and you don't know when a migraine is going to hit and you won't be able to perform, then you're unreliable.
And she makes it very clear that unless you are a huge star, you can't get away with it.
Right. So I thought they were really well done, from describing the aura to the whole thing. So
yeah, see, I'm not one of those people that gets auras, but I did get the feeling it coming on in the back of your head, and there is a sensation, it's coming. I can numb this flying over your head. So
I get I haven't had a migraine in ages. I've had maybe a handful my whole life, but I get very more even than light sensitive. I get sound sensitive.
Oh, I hate sound.
Yeah, so
smell.
Yeah, I just have a really hard time. I don't want to hear anything, and then turn the lights all down and just cry till it goes away.
If it's really bad, I usually keep my sunglasses on in the house, and I'm very smell sensitive. I'm very triggered by the smells.
Interesting.
And so, like, any kind of, someone just said I get tension headaches, and I feel you, because I get a lot of those. I probably get 5 or 6 headaches a month, easily.
Oh yeah, at least once a week for you.
And I would say the majority of them do not go away with regular Advil.
No.
So I will sometimes take the migraine medicine, because after like 2 days of having it in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the other thing too is I like it that this might be TMI for the show, but I like that you don't throw up as much anymore. Because I remember you saying, like, I had a headache and I was just.
Oh, well, you know what? Actually, I was laughing. I did put that in my notes because she was talking about the vomiting through the migraines. This is TMI. if those of you who have migraines really bad probably know it's the throwing up that you want, because that means you're on the bottom, you're heading downhill now, and you're going towards the end.
Oh, ooh,
And it's like, yes, I want to throw up, because you're like trying to like deal with the nausea, and then when you do, you're like, oh,
yeah.
that's better.
And
So
you know,
it's always a plus. Hi,
I
Sue.
have, I get,
Sue popped in. She says hello.
I get hormone headaches. So,
I
which,
used to.
yeah, and I know one of my kids has had like maybe two migraines in her life, but the last one was so bad that it was a vomiting one. Like it was just not. So I really like that depiction. It really humanized her, I think.
And it was one that I think any woman can understand, because I think most women suffer from a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most women get what they were getting, which was, can't you just fight through it? And it's like, no, sometimes
No,
I can't move.
no. I just need to lie in a darkened room.
Yeah.
So one more thing we wanted to chat about just briefly before we go
Yeah.
is the nature of Reggie and Suling's relationship, because it came up in a few reviews.
Yep.
And I wondered if you liked how it was handled.
I did. I read the reviews. I am one of those people that when I start to read a book, I like to go to the low star reviews to see what the complaints are, because gushing doesn't give me as much information as like a 2-star review. And a lot of people complained out on Goodreads, and not a lot, but a handful, I should say. And they didn't like the emphasis on it. And I like think that their complaint was a big old nothing burger. Personally, I mean, I get it. There are some books where they'll put in okay, spoiler again, it's a same-sex relationship. They'll put one in and it'll feel like they tagged it in there just to put one in.
Yeah, it's token.
Yeah, a token. They check the box. And I've read those, and yeah, that is annoying. In this case, I think that it drove a lot of the behavior.
Oh, 100%.
And I think that having them be lovers strengthened the plot, didn't weaken it. And it wasn't an add-in. It was a lot of what Suling did. If they were just friends, it would have been like her being heroic, but it made perfect sense that she was doing all these things for the woman she loves.
Right.
And so I thought it was much more realistic that it was like that. And I actually didn't think it was that overt. It was just, I thought it was very well done. And very well
it just
explained.
was. And yeah. I think if you want to look at the actions of friends versus lovers, I mean, Gemma is in San Francisco and supposed to meet Reggie there. Mm-hmm. And Reggie's not there. And someone said, like, oh, she took off to Colorado to paint some whatever. And like Gemma's just really annoyed that her friend would do this. Whereas Suling, Reggie disappears and Suling's like, I'm not going to rest till I find out what happened to Reggie. Like right. It's a very different, yeah. So she was so invested in that. So I felt like you, if they hadn't been lovers, then I don't think Suling would have been as invested in that. And
they weren't lovers at the time. I think that's mentioned. I think they're very good about portraying that there's lovers from the beginning, and then there's people who fall deeply in love with their best friend.
Yeah.
And I think that these are two women that had a connection and they fell in love with each other. And it just happened to be that they were both women and they fell deeply in love.
Yeah.
And I think that's portrayed.
So there's a really great scene where, spoiler alert, where Suling is
big spoiler alert in the notes.
I know, right, going to rescue Reggie, and she remembers her mother and auntie talking about two of the girls in the brothel who were in a relationship. And there's this beautiful passage about the red silk cord between two people. And it doesn't matter if it's a man and a woman or two men or two women. It's if you're bound by this cord. And of course we see that symbol in the ring around Suling's neck on the red cord. So I really loved that, and I thought it was treated with great sensitivity, with with a lot of grace, and just, it just was, and it was very loving,
Yeah.
and
And
so
it wasn't portrayed as a sexual relationship. You knew they had sex, but it was really portrayed as a deep commitment between two people who
it
loved
was
each other, and if they never had sex, they'd still have this deep, deep love for each other.
it was totally about love and not sex.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
The auntie loved her. Thornton did her wrong. I will not spoil that, but I liked her.
I did too.
I was bummed at that part.
I did too. Okay, so final verdict.
2 thumbs up. One for Katie, one for Janie.
One for from me as well. Highly recommend. I really loved it. I can say it's not a Kate Quinn book, not a Janie Chang book, but it's a book that brings their talents together in a new and rewarding way.
And that's actually important to emphasize, because I will say that was another thing that the 2-star reviews was this was not a Kate Quinn book. It's like, well, no, it wasn't. It was a Kate Quinn and Janie Chang book.
Yeah.
And so, don't go in expecting a typical Kate Quinn read.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like, don't go into it expecting something to be like Kate Quinn, but expect Kate Quinn quality.
Yes.
And I think that's what this was.
Janie
Chang qualities. Let's not shortchange Janie, because I think she's a fantastic writer.
And I think that but I think again speaks to both of them that they were able to take their voices and quiet them to make a different voice. And I think that is not easy to do. I think that takes a lot of putting your ego at the door.
Yeah. All right. So we are now at, oh my goodness, 32 minutes. Why don't you tell us what's up next?
On the 26th, we are going to have Sarah Ackerman here. I'm very excited. I just downloaded The Uncharted Flight of Olivia West. I'm actually super excited to read this. It's got little shades of Amelia Earhart in it.
Yeah.
And my husband's a pilot, so I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be.
Yeah.
What are you reading now, real quick?
What am I reading now? Well, since I just finished The Phoenix Crown, I'm going to be reading Sarah's. But I'm actually digging into a middle grade local book that I've been wanting to read for a while, just as a little palate cleanser. So I think I'm doing that first, and then, and I'm also reading Voices of Carpathia, because I'm doing all kinds of Titanic research still.
Yeah, I don't count
and it's due at the library soon. So I'm going to round up
ones that I've been reading. Although for a palate cleanser, I actually have Elijah Knight and Denny Bryce's book.
Oh gosh, yes, I have that on deck for this month as well, because it just came out.
So anyways, thank you for listening. Those of you who joined in, thank you, Sue, and the other person. We have 2 people. We will put this up on both YouTube, and we will put giant spoiler alerts. So this was unusual that we would say some spoilers, but it was hard to tell.
I know, and we tried not to give too many, but there are a few there that we just, yeah.
And as always, you can find us in our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/stepintothestory. And we are on Instagram and YouTube as @StepIntoTheStoryBooks. So we'll see you in a couple weeks on the 26th with Sarah Ackerman. Can't wait.
Me too.